right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MCJ Report. We have a somewhat different episode in store for tonight on this Thursday evening. But first of all, welcome to the broadcast, and let me know if you can hear the transmission loud and clear by making a comment. So I'd like to welcome everybody tuned in on Rumble and YouTube. That's right, we are broadcasting via these two platforms. And what can I say? Welcome to the show. On tonight's show, something pretty different. You know, we're really mixing things up tonight. And you will see an interview featuring myself. I know that sounds kind of weird, but conducted by Craig Schulze. That's right. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Craig. It was a great honor to be on Craig's show. He runs his own independent platform. He runs a podcast online. So before we get started with the interview, I'm just going to show you his website. And by the way, his Facebook page is right there, facebook.com/Craig D. Schulze. So have a look at this. Very much an honor for me to be on this man's show. He's a true Australian success story. So here's his website right here, CraigSchulze.com. That's SCHULZE. Just having a look down here. So I'm going to read to you a little bit. Craig's one of the world's leading lifestyle entrepreneurs. And throughout his 20 years in business, he's always positioned himself, I'm just reading from the website, in front of the latest trends, moving from the corporate world to traditional business, owning 5 fitness clubs. Craig now has a global business where he has products shipping to over 100 different countries, and from humble beginnings from a mining town. That's right. His vision, mission, and values are all around creating a lifestyle by design, which is about creating complete time and financial freedom. So if you'd like to learn more about what Craig does, his website is CraigSchulze.com, and it's really just a great pleasure. And the thing about Craig is that he's an entrepreneur. He's set himself up really well. Now, he could choose to remain silent during this corona situation, during this tremendous fraud, but he's not. Craig is speaking out. He's making his voice heard. He's been featured on various interviews over in the United States, and he's attracting good interviewees to his show as well. So once again, Craig, if you're listening, thank you for having me on your show. And to everybody at home, it's CraigSchulze.com. Or if you'd like to keep up with Craig on Facebook, we have facebook.com/Craig D. Schulze. Again, that's SCHULZE. All right, well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the broadcast. I can see you guys in the chat right now. It's great to have you. I see a lot of familiar usernames. Always a pleasure. But without further ado, I'll play the interview. It goes for about an hour. So just to reiterate, and this kind of feels kind of weird playing like my own interview, but you know, what are you going to do, right? What are you going to do? So Craig interviews me, and I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that I don't ramble too much, and I hope that it's not boring. I can't give any guarantees. Maybe you'll find me boring when I'm being interviewed. I don't know. Anyway, too much overthinking. I'm just going to click play.
Okay, everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the One Shop Movement podcast, where we dive deep into the stories of businessmen, entrepreneurs, anyone that's out there making a difference to the world. And we are in my special series, which I refer to as Navigating the Fog, which is helping people understand what's really happening in the current situation and also helping people with solutions on the other side. I've had some incredible guests, and we have another one today. His name is Morgan Jonas, and he is the founder of the MCJ Report, the highly popular independent media. He's also a businessman, entrepreneur. He's got political aspirations, and he's doing amazing things in the world. So thanks for jumping on the show, Morgan.
Thank you very much, Craig. It's great to be here.
Great. And I always ask every guest to just provide a couple of minutes insight to your story, to where you are today. So, a bit of your business background and why you're doing what you are doing right now.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks. It's really great to be here. So I come from the international trade space. So the bulk of my working life I've spent in that particular arena. I've traveled all around Asia, facilitating deals between countries in Asia and Western countries. And for a good bulk of that time, I also ran a combat sports equipment business, which was based on the import-export model. So it was very eye-opening, seeing the world and seeing how everything functions. But I suppose I got to a point in my working life where I started really questioning what I was doing. And it was probably in about 2015 that I started really paying attention to politics and looking at the foreign policy that had been orchestrated in our country, particularly in relation to international trade, but more specifically, the devastating effect that government policy had on local business. So this was really around the time when Trump was coming up in 2015, and he was conducting lots of rallies around the United States, and he was speaking in great detail regarding the sad state of affairs in American manufacturing industry and the extent to which America had been sold out. So it prompted me to look into our situation, and being from international trade, I found it quite compelling, and it dawned on me that we were perhaps in a worse situation than what Trump was describing in America. I looked at the state of manufacturing in our country, the state of industry. We'd been completely sold out to foreign interests. Local producers, family businesses that had been in business for decades were getting run out of their own industry because politicians who many of whom had never spent a day in the real world, had signed trade agreements, and with zero regard for some of our country's most proud local businesses. And it dawned on me that was the space that I was working in, and learning what I was able to learn. I didn't feel comfortable doing what I was doing. Inadvertently, I suppose you could say, I had contributed to the outsourcing of our local business, and it didn't sit well with me at all. So I decided I wanted to make some changes, and I decided that I wanted to move out of that space and ultimately get into broadcasting, or maybe even politics, and that's been the journey. So here we are.
Yeah, that's really important to understand. Like you just mentioned, inadvertently, you don't know, and sometimes ignorance comes into play when you're doing that. The first question I want to ask you about probably relates to that a little bit, around the Belt and Road deal. Now, I want to share a little story for the listeners, that my experience of that, and again, being quite ignorant, I had traveled all around the world, and I was touring through Zambia a few years ago, and I was with my colleague, and all I saw everywhere was airports being built and Chinese billboards and new roads and infrastructure, and the whole billboards and everything. It looked like a Grand Prix track with Chinese riding over everything. And the colleague I was traveling with, I asked him about it, and he said, look, China's come and made a huge investment into our country. And through just pure ignorance, I was like, what, that sounds like a good deal. So they're going to build all this for you. And he goes, no, they own us now. So, which obviously then I started to hear about Belt and Road Initiative, which, on the outside, you probably wouldn't even have a clue what that is. But I've heard you talk about this quite often. Do you want to share some insight for the audience about the Belt and Road deal and what that actually really means?
Yeah, sure. So Belt and Road Initiative is a Chinese global infrastructure building initiative. I suppose that's what the Chinese Communist Party would tell you. So I suppose the Belt and Road Initiative will vary based on who you ask. If you were to ask the officials from the Chinese Communist Party, they would tell you that it's about connecting the world and connecting different trading routes, both on land and maritime, and helping developing nations to industrialize and to build infrastructure such as roads, ports, bridges, etc. But I paid attention to this deal because I'd spent time in China myself, and I understood the basic Chinese model of doing business, especially with Westerners, which includes a lot of schmoozing, a lot of I suppose treatments to try and make you feel special, that you're part of some sort of club. And I had no doubt Daniel Andrews, with his with his mentality, his own sort of self-perceived sense of importance, would have lapped up that particular strategy. But anyway, sorry, I'm getting a bit off track here. Belt and Road Initiative. So why did I feel concerned about it? Well, first of all, the types of countries that were signing up to China's Belt and Road Initiative were generally developing nations that were heavily predisposed to corruption and shady political activity. So the vast majority of the Western world had rejected this deal along the lines of seeing these corrupt nations sign up to China and having reason to believe there was something more involved rather than just some sort of financing arrangement for building infrastructure in other nations for the purpose of what China would refer to as reciprocal trade. So we look at these Belt and Road Initiative deals around the world. We see we saw one nation after another buckling under the debt, really unable to service their loans, which led us to believe that probably it's by design. Probably the terms of these loans were just usurious and able to be pushed through due to the corrupt nature of whatever country China happened to be dealing with at the time. A lot of African countries where we know political corruption is prolific jumped onto the Belt and Road Initiative, and we saw all sorts of dodgy consequences that arose from those deals. We saw train projects that were substandard. We saw countries forced to part with their natural resources. Okay, there was a big case of that in Ecuador. Countries unable to service their loans, completely usurious financing arrangements where natural resources, land, and or other infrastructure would be put up as collateral. So it was a huge expansionist project for China with the objective of acquiring a vast degree of foreign assets that would ultimately become centralized under the umbrella of the Chinese Communist Party. And the leaders of these foreign nations that dealt with China would be very corrupt in nature, and there's court documents to prove the vast amount of corruption that was littered all throughout the Belt and Road Initiative. And we saw nations defaulting on their loans. We saw ports, other infrastructure handed over to the Chinese Communist Party. We saw the establishment of a military base in Djibouti, which was China's first real military base outside of China and outside of the South China Sea. We saw the port in Sri Lanka, ports throughout the Indo-Pacific from Pakistan, and infrastructure in Bangladesh and China, developing all of these interconnected corridors and infrastructure that we believe, based on China's expansionist nature, could be used down the track for military purposes. And we see that type of activity all over the place, Indonesia, even Papua New Guinea. And so I was looking at this Belt and Road Initiative, and I was watching the commentary and looking at China's model, believing that China was an expansionist regime that not only wanted to expand its global commercial influence, but also its ideological system of governance, which is, of course, just brutal authoritarianism. And the nations signing up to this deal were all corrupt in nature, allowing China to establish surveillance states in countries where people were starving in Africa. And so why did Victoria sign up to it? The federal government, not that I give them much credit for much these days, the federal government made it quite clear they weren't going to sign on to the Belt and Road Initiative. There were major concerns expressed by our nation's leading foreign policy experts. Also from the United States at the Pentagon, the Belt and Road Initiative was widely perceived as an expansionist operation of the Chinese communist regime. And then we have this guy, Daniel Andrews, that signs up to it, just doesn't tell anyone what he's doing. He gets on a plane, he goes to China, he signs this memorandum of understanding that was secret. We had to fight tooth and nail to have it released. And the next thing you know, he's negotiating the outsourcing of our infrastructure projects, deals that we know contain clauses, including but not limited to using Chinese infrastructure firms, Chinese workers, Chinese materials, Chinese financing organizations. And the unions weren't speaking up or saying anything. Scott Morrison had his head in the sand. And I saw this emerging situation that I considered to be a grab for power by Daniel Andrews. I considered Daniel Andrews was circumventing the federal government and essentially acting as if he was, say, the president of Victoria, even though he was a premier and his duties should have been limited to state affairs, not foreign affairs. And yet he's trying to be some sort of big man on the world stage, playing foreign policy. And I knew he had authoritarianism in his eyes because he didn't give two damns about Australian foreign policy or the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. He said, okay, this is China. We are Victoria. We're going to become one. He even said Victoria was going to be China's gateway into Australia. And I said, this man's utterly dangerous signing this deal. So I had by that stage already mostly removed myself from the international trade arena. And I launched a protest in 2019, trying to raise alarm bells, trying to get the word out there to all the other Victorians that, hey, this guy right here, this guy's a dictator wannabe. And if we leave him unchecked, because it doesn't look like the Morrison government's going to step in, this guy will ultimately erode our freedoms and intertwine what is already an established ruthless, murderous, authoritarian regime into Victorian society. And so that was the Belt and Road Initiative. That's why I was so concerned about it. And those are basically my views. Sorry, that was a bit long.
No, that's a great insight, because it's really important people understand, what we're happening now. It hasn't just happened by chance. It's been happening for a long time. And, I'm somebody that I would classify myself, use common sense at all time, critical think. I picked up on big agriculture, big pharma, and that way back in 2007, 8, and 9 with projects that I was working on. I got through the global financial crisis and realized what the big banking system was all about. So sort of always had my eye on the what was going on from afar, but never had an interest in it. My actual interest was to exclude myself and create my own economy and say, I don't want to be impacted by these people. So I knew Dan Andrews as a guy that cost $1.2 billion on removing that underground road straight away. And I thought, that's just reckless. But anyway, move on from that. But right early on in this journey, COVID scenario, I was straight away looking at joining the dots, and I started coming out quite, I guess, against my philosophies of, if you speak about religion, politics, anything controversial, it always comes back to hurt you. But I was prepared to put my reputation on the line. I kept on saying, they're trying to make you think that 1 + 1 = 4, but we all know that doesn't. So anyway, you popped up onto my radar, and I come across you through two investigative reports. One was what you referred to as Don't Get Tested, I believe. And the other one was a corporate insight into Pfizer. Now, I'll encourage everyone to go to, you can just say where they can go to get those reports, to have a look for themselves. So they don't spend the whole time there. But what was, say, in a few minutes, 2 or 3 really alarming findings that you found in those reports that you can just share to tease people to go and listen to the whole episodes?
Yeah, sure thing. People can check out the reports on mcjreport.com under the tab Special Reports. So the report Don't Get Tested was in relation to the COVID-19 PCR tests, which are the most common tests used throughout the world for allegedly detecting in patients the virus called SARS-CoV-2. And it was very on in the piece in 2020 that here in Australia and all countries around the world went through the same thing. There was a massive contest for buying up huge amounts of these PCR tests, millions of PCR tests. And there were essentially kind of like bidding wars going on. And the primary supplier of these PCR tests was, of course, China. So I'd been watching China very closely over the years, and it was obviously the relationship between Australian politicians and Chinese officials that first got me really concerned about the potential erosion of our freedom in the first place. So all of a sudden I see, okay, we've been advised that there was a novel coronavirus from Wuhan. We've been advised that it's very dangerous, and we've been not advised, but urged, and I would say somewhat coerced into taking these tests. So being from international trade and also having a sales background, when I'm presented with a situation where somebody is really trying to force me to do something, I take a step back and say, hey, what's going on here? What's in it for that person? So I observed the type of language used by Daniel Andrews in relation to testing, and he was utterly obsessed with it. Every second word that came out of his mouth was, you have to go and get tested, go and get tested. You might have it even if you think you don't have it. And so I thought, this sounds a little bit funny. I wonder who truly stands to benefit from the use of all of these tests, right? So I went to the Therapeutic Goods Administration website. I looked up the tests. I found they had been only provisionally approved by the TGA, meaning they didn't really know if they truly did what they maybe believed was the intention of these tests. And then I thought to myself, well, I wonder whoever's selling these tests is really cashing in and making a serious amount of money. And I just thought I thought it was incredible that so many tests were being consumed based on nothing more than a provisionally approved status with the TGA. So I did a bit of digging. I wanted to find out who's the main supplier of these tests. So I stumbled across a deal that was orchestrated between Andrew Forrest from the mining industry via his charity, the Minderoo Foundation, and a Chinese, a huge multi-billion-dollar Chinese biotech firm called BGI Group, and facilitated by the Health Minister, Greg Hunt. So a really sort of strange triangle there. And so the more I looked into this one of the major deals for PCR tests in Australia, which saw the first 10 million or so imported into the country, the more concerned I became. I looked into BGI Group. You've got subsidiaries of this particular company on watch lists in the United States, investigated for what appears to be very apparent ties to wide-scale human rights abuses and crimes against humanity. You've got a PCR test that only has a provisional approval. Australia just jumping to import millions upon millions of these tests without even understanding whether or not these tests are capable of determining infection. And we, the public, are just, freaking out and being sold into taking these tests. I said, no, I think there's more to it. So that's why I did it. Yeah.
And yeah, look, I mean, really, we're 20 odd months into this, and it's been pretty much well known about the test and the accuracy of the test and the cycle threshold for 18 of the 20 months. Someone like yourself might have picked that up really quickly, but, majority of the people know that. And it's still 60,000 were conducted in Melbourne yesterday for their 1,700 cases. Absolutely crazy. And the funny thing is, I've only heard one time in 20 months that the chief health officer was asked about the test. It was a month or so ago when the US said, we're going to remove that test. And he was like a deer in headlights. It was sort of like, next question. The experts said that this is the diamond standard test. Like, there's literally no scrutiny, no accountability across this whole story. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, that's one of the big problems with this entire corona situation. There's been no independent oversight. Experts who hold opposing views, experts with decades worth of experience, are shut down. They're not given a voice. They're blacklisted from appearing on the mainstream media. The mainstream media works very closely with the government of the day. And yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that one.
Yeah, and your second report, again, similar sort of insight. It was in depth into, I guess, the company rap sheet, let's say, of Pfizer, which is one of the producers of one of the, what would you call it, experimental injections that we're being subjected to at the moment. So what was a couple of the key findings there? And I'd encourage everyone to go and listen to it more if you want to find out the full story.
Yeah, so I made a presentation on the corporate rap sheet of Pfizer, or in other terms, I made a presentation on the historical crimes committed by Pfizer over their many years of being in business. So I've always been somewhat skeptical of the pharmaceutical corporations and more specifically some of the products that have been made over the years, products that have resulted in widespread further suffering of many people. So I thought to myself, the world, I guess, how do I phrase this? There was so much fear mongering, and still is, surrounding corona, and pharmaceutical companies were painted by governments all around the world as the supposed saviors of humanity. Now, anyone who's done any research on the history of big pharma understands without a doubt that this is one of the most ruthless, cruel, and inhumane industries in the world, and is responsible for human suffering on a global industrial scale. And I knew about some of Pfizer's corporate misconduct and criminal activity from the past. So I took it upon myself to make a presentation dealing Pfizer's corporate rap sheet. I went into detail about several lawsuits, and these are only the lawsuits that were able to be publicized. God knows how many were either not publicized or people who never had the means to fight back. And that's what I wanted to do, because to me, it's all about informed consent. My view is that the Australian public has the right to know everything about the historical inhumane business misconduct of these corporations, and that's what I did. So I mean, Pfizer has engaged in the worst of the worst. They've knowingly ignored side effects of certain products in the past. Side effects including but not limited to birth defects. Okay, there's evidence in court documents of that. They've engaged in clinical trials on children without proper informed consent of adults, and those were conducted over in Africa mostly. And a lot of these pharmaceutical corporations, they like to run clinical trials on children in third world countries, because they know that at the end of the day, if the parents kick up a fuss, they can just hand over a couple of dollars and silence them. It's just absolutely disgusting. And Pfizer's engaged in all of this. They've been involved in the absolute biggest fines in US history. And the Australian government is just dancing around, making Pfizer out to be some sort of savior that's here for the betterment of humanity, to save the world. Whereas I'm here saying this is a corporation that has a market value of over $200 billion. The last thing they really care about is your health. And that's what I put on record.
Yeah. Now you launch those two reports, and then the birth of, I'll let you share the vision of it, MCJ Report, which, regularly gets, 2,000 live viewers at any given time, probably more. You can share that your biggest audience you've ever had on the report, but do you want to share your vision of what you did there? You're now over 100 episodes in. You do at least 3 episodes a week. You're now interviewing great guests. Do you want to share your vision of that and how that come about?
Yeah, sure. Well, it was from 2015 that I had a vision of creating my own independent media show. It was inspired by a very good friend of mine from Washington, D.C., who was running a show that the format of MCJ Report is based on. My friend Mike Closer from Washington, and I was a guest on his show many times. And so my ambition was to create a similar format in Australia. And it came about in 2015 when I really started delving into foreign policy and policy of the government that I considered to be an assault on Australian industry and Australian manufacturers and so forth. So, and then it finally got to the point of launching it basically last year.
Yeah, and some of the I guess what I've seen in your reports are, just nearly cross-examining media headlines in a way where you're, keeping, I would probably refer to you keeping the mainstream media accountable and politicians accountable, and make sure that people are aware there are two sides to every story. Would you say that that's a key component?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the mainstream media is one of the biggest problems we have in this country. The control and narrative they hold, the way they're able to manipulate the masses by openly publishing dishonest headlines and pushing soft political narratives through their articles. It's just such a huge problem, and I think that the dishonesty that we have in the mainstream media in Australia is truly committing a terrible it's a terrible disservice to the people of this country. So the nature of that deception was also a big motivation for me to start my own show and to shine a light on the lies and dishonesty of the mainstream media.
I want to just transition a little bit now. It's something that, we're facing what you can only describe as near total authoritarian style police brutality. And I want to move on to protests. And I think you very early on in the days when I guess protests were just starting to become, a thing towards this government. There's a photo I saw of you on your Facebook of you surrounded by 200 police officers that brutally then threw you into the ground. You're hardly an individual by yourself there. And things have gone from bad to extremely a whole lot worse. I have a lot of people overseas reaching out to me. In fact, I'm being interviewed on a couple of overseas shows this week myself, asking, is this true? Some people are not even aware of it because it's not even getting shown overseas. If you could just spend a minute or two just explaining a bit about that and what you've seen and witnessed, that would be good.
Yeah, I mean, living in Victoria, it's an absolute police state. You've got a situation where these directions are drummed up in the Victorian executive. Parliament shut down. There's no debate. The directions are implemented unilaterally. The so-called health measures, which are supposedly based on science, or I say they're based on pseudoscience, and enforced by a brutal police force. So we're living under an effective dictatorship. We have a police force which has become more and more militarized over the years, a police force that are very quick to get very violent. And I've witnessed so much of it for 18 months, or probably more than 18 months now. So myself and so many of my friends, we've all been arrested with excessive force, arrested by the riot police, public order response they'll send 6 guys to arrest one person. And I can tell you that it can be a very unpleasant experience. I recall feeling like my shoulders were about to be ripped out of their sockets. You know, they've got equipment on the front of their vest. They grab you from behind your head and pull your face through their equipment. Like, they've got cameras, they've got all sorts of things, they've got pens and stuff. And it ends really badly for a lot of people. I've got a good mate of mine. He's got a fractured spine right now after getting arrested by these people in public order response. And I also know a lot of women that have been assaulted very badly by these thugs that are walking around wearing Victoria Police uniforms. I spoke with a 70-year-old grandmother the other week, a few weeks ago. She was violently pushed to the ground, and they smashed her head on the concrete, and immediately she was sprayed by 2 officers with pepper spray. Now she's going to be traumatized for life because of this. So the police state is very real. It's brutal, and there's a lot of police officers out there that need to be prosecuted.
And just and in regards to intertwining the media into this story too, there was I guess nearly a breakthrough or a breaking point where the union turned on one of the major industries, the construction industry, and they are typically a pretty united industry fighting for their rights quite often, and it all went really pear-shaped a week or so ago. And because a lot of mandates have been introduced here, and there's a lot of industries now impacted by these mandates. But it really got to boiling point where there was nearly army-looking trucks in the street, but the media were referring to people who are just everyday, teachers and mums and dads as extremists and terrorists and right-wing Nazis and you name it. It was quite shocking to see. You even had blackouts over airspace to try and block what was happening. Do you want to, you've got your own show and you would have come across a lot of content around that. Do you want to just explain that situation for our international guests?
Yeah, well, it's a complete slander campaign. Since the inception of this corona situation, we've had these directions imposed upon millions of people, directions that can be argued are not based on real science, not based on real debate, and certainly not based on independent oversight. And these directions have resulted in the restricting of freedom for huge amounts of people. All right, we're talking about things like you can't take your kids to the playground because supposedly if you do, the virus is going to go and kill someone. Curfews, right? Patrols, the military deployed to the streets, knocking on people's doors to make sure people aren't breaking the curfews. Gathering limits, and the list goes on and on and on. But the probably the most devastating effect of these lockdowns and these so-called health directions has been there's a few. There's obviously there's mental health, the impact on young people especially, which God knows how we're ever going to recover from that. But the financial impact, the extent to which countless amounts of people have lost their livelihoods, lost their jobs, lost everything, lost their dignity, left humiliated, left unable to pay the bills, take care of their families. So what do people do in that case where they feel completely voiceless, completely helpless? The last thing they have is their voice. So it's a natural response. It's a democratic right to take those concerns to the streets and to call out the politicians and say, hey, your policies are hurting me. I'm losing everything here. You need to listen to me. And when that happens, those people, and I know I've been out there with the people every step of the way since the beginning, they're met with extreme violence from Victoria Police. And then to spit in their faces even further, they're labeled as extremists. by the mainstream media. They're labeled as violent. They're labeled as hostile. They've been conflated with neo-Nazis and far-right extremists. And I can tell you they're not. I can tell you the people that protest against these inhumane lockdowns, they are among the most brave, decent people that I've ever met in my life, people from all walks of life, people from all industries. We've got truck drivers to doctors to lawyers, people coming together for the cause of freedom against the government, people that have lost everything, people of all ages, all walks of life. They are among the absolute best people I've ever met in my life. And the way they're treated by police, abused, assaulted by the police, and then slandered by the mainstream media, it's absolutely disgusting. And it motivates me to take this fight to the next level.
Yeah, and I want to just extend on from the current situation. Your partner's been doing amazing things, or now fiance is doing amazing things as well. Started a brand, Reignite Democracy, so people go across and see what Monica's been doing. And you know, she's been a huge voice, a huge educator. She's built a huge audience, just like yourself. And again, another political aspirant as well. But she recently went through, again, police state to the next level and effectively become the first political prisoner for a very, very long time, and arrested really for next to nothing. Incitement, I think, were the charges. Do you want to just elaborate on that situation, please?
Okay, yes. So she was accused by the police of incitement to breach the chief health officer's directions. She was arrested by plainclothes police officers, intercepted actually. So we're not sure exactly how they found her, if they were following her or what they were doing, but they intercepted her. They took her in and presented her with a list of bail conditions that I would describe as political in nature. They including but not limited to restricting her right to speak in opposition against the chief health officer. So it was North Korean style politically motivated speech control sort of conditions that were imposed. Okay, so to give you an example, one of the conditions was to, quote, not incite opposition to the chief health officer directions. Okay, so devil's in the detail. What does the word opposition mean? It's defined by strong disagreement, which of course can be expressed in a number of ways, such as verbal argument, song, dance. There's a lot of music out there that expresses strong opposition to politics. So it was that the conditions were hugely onerous and restricted her speech. So she did the right thing. She said, I'm not signing those conditions. Put me in jail. So they put her in jail for 22 days in solitary confinement. Thankfully, we were able to put together a very good legal team and we challenged those bail conditions in the Supreme Court, and the judge sided with us. 10 out of the 15 conditions were scrapped. The judge was very good looking at these conditions. It's like, you're trying to stop somebody from having an opinion here. So Monica's set a precedent now. So for other people who are facing similar charges, they now will most likely be issued with Monica's revised conditions and will not have to be subjected to the same North Korean style ultimatum, sign away your rights or we'll throw you in jail. So that's what happened. So yeah, she did an incredible job.
Very brave to be able to do that, because a lot of people would have just said, you know what, this is just all too hard and I'm not, going to be locked away in solitary confinement for that period of time. So
exactly,
just totally inspiring what she's done. And yeah, probably in that situation, the person in prison becomes more empowering to more people for that good act, let's say. So hopefully some goodness does arise from that. So just on political ambitions, we could talk about this whole scenario of the big lib lab and its two accomplices and the changing of the landscape there. You want to even throw your hat into the ring. What do you see right now? Is why are you doing that? And do you see our political landscape being able to be changed from effectively a full control model?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think when you look at the average type of character that makes up our parliaments on both a state and federal level, in my view, I see a lot of people who are not loyal to this country. I don't believe the average character are loyal to the Australian people, and instead have demonstrated and will continue to demonstrate that they're willing to sell out the freedoms and sell out the national interest of Australians for the purpose of preserving and advancing their own career. So I see a tremendous amount of disloyalty from our politicians, and I see an incredible lack of talent from them as well. The very vast majority, or at least a lot of these people, would probably never have a chance of making it in the private sector. So I've been fortunate enough to gain a strong supportive following via MCJ Report. I think I can do a better job than a lot of these characters in Canberra, which, by the way, that's not saying much. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, because at the end of the day, I think you could pick a random person out off the street, and that person will probably do a better job than the typical sort of politician that works in our parliaments. But I think given my experience, given the supporter base, and given the fact that I love this country and I love my fellow Australians, to me it's a no-brainer. I look at it as a duty. It's something that I believe I'm capable of doing. So I'm going to go for it, and I'll leave it up to the people whether or not they want to vote for me and have someone like me in Parliament.
And I wish you all the best in that. And we have seen a lot of people that have, just said enough is enough here and started putting their hand up and moving out of the mainstream. And a few, I guess, independent parties, like you've got your Reignite Democracy, Australia One, Great Australian Party, IMOP, all these independents are starting to get a little bit more momentum, and we do need to really have more accountability and checks and balances across the country, because we've been put into this situation from Labor having full control of the seats, and really three independents have really been the balance of power there, and we've been held in the biggest open air prison in the world 250 days because of that. So hopefully more people like you get into power, and that would be a good thing. So while I'm on the law, and I do have this show to help people understand, I had the Know Your Rights group on that I think are doing really good things to help people understand their rights, because as they say, if you don't know your rights, you basically don't have any rights. You recently had arguably the biggest constitutional professor in Australia. I may have got that incorrect, but I think his name's Augusto Zimmerman, on your show recently. What are some, I guess, key things people should understand in regards to their rights and what's happening to us right now?
Yeah, well, yeah, I was very, very humbled to have Professor Augusto Zimmerman on the show, one of our country's leading professors of constitutional law. Just a huge honor to have Augusto on. There was a lot we discussed in the conversation. One of the takeaways is that people have a civic responsibility to disobey unjust and inhumane laws. So it's a responsibility of all Australians to call it out, and also to disobey unlawful laws, or laws that have the scope to inflict damage upon humanity. We also talked about the notion of informed consent being a human right, and nobody should be deprived of it. So there's so many topics. We spoke about the international criminal courts and so much more. So he's a tremendous wealth of knowledge. He regularly contributes to The Spectator, and I wholeheartedly encourage everybody to follow Augusto's work.
Yeah, and again, jump onto the MCJ report. I'm sure it's well flagged of his interview on your website as well. We'll get the details of that at the end. Just a couple of last things. I want to give people hope. And I feel right now we're probably in arguably the darkest time, the most concerned time. And, it still baffles me. We're moving into summer, 90% of my local area still walking around with their mask on, and it feels like they're complying. But right now we've got probably the heaviest handed. We sort of moved, I guess, through stages of this vaccine component where it was, let's see how many run to the fence to get it themselves. Let's blackmail them. And now it's like, if you don't do this, you're basically a second-class citizen. It sort of moved into that sort of phase. Do you see hope? There's lawsuits happening. There's more people waking. There's, where do you see the current state of the situation?
It really all comes down to the people of Australia, but the scapegoating division campaign has been pretty successful up until this point. You don't have to look any further than online to see the division and vitriol out there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people out in the public that have purchased, they've bought the narrative. They believe that it's the so-called anti-vaxxers that are the reason for the lockdowns, and the so-called anti-vaxxers that are the reason for why businesses are unable to open and people not having their freedom. It's been a very, very carefully crafted propaganda campaign that has required billions of dollars of investment to execute. So, you got a 24/7 news cycle pushing the division, and also politicians as well. So it's manifesting in real life. I was at a protest maybe about a month ago. We were walking in a nice, decent group in the city, and there were people in the high-rise apartment buildings that opened their windows and threw boiling water down onto the protesters and other identified liquids onto the protesters. So that to me was the true sort of physical manifestation of the scapegoating and division campaign. And honestly, it reminded me of World War II, when you had Jews being sort of rounded up, marched off out of the streets, and people would come out of their homes and spit on them and stuff like that. So Australians need to turn off their televisions and understand that the mainstream media does not have the best interest of the country at heart. And the average politician in Canberra is not patriotic, not loyal, and cares more about their career. The pharmaceutical corporations care more about profit than they do about your health. And those 3 points right there, if people can just sort of sit back and think that maybe there's merit to those 3 points I made, then hopefully we can get on with it and get some unity back. But I am seeing some promising hope. I am seeing this sounds so weird to talk about, but I do see a coming together of the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, and people that have been jabbed, raising their voices in favor of not supporting any type of discriminatory measures that would exclude unvaccinated people from participating in society. So for the negatives that we see in terms of division, we also see a new movement of unity. The question is, which unit will gain, which side of the spectrum will gain the most momentum? I think we're just going to have to see how it plays out.
And I guess there's now, I've noticed, I've wondered for a long period of time why lawyers are not calling this out. This is a clear breach of our human rights. And there's just started to be the odd case happen. And it sounds, through listening to them talk, that there's more and more law firms standing up. Is that through your channels what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, there is. There's a lot of legal action. For sure. You've got AFL solicitors up in New South Wales. There's a lot going on over there. There's some class actions brewing in Tasmania in relation to mandatory vaccinations. We've got action here in Victoria as well. So we've got Bosun case solicitors taking action against Brett Sutton in his capacity as Chief Health Officer. and there's a lot of action brewing all throughout the country. And it's what's been advised to me from certain legal experts is that it will really take one big success, perhaps in the Supreme Court, to set a precedent for and a strategy for others to follow. So obviously, yeah, these things take time, and I think that's why Daniel Andrews is ramping up the pressure, and he wants to get everyone jabbed before we have success in our judiciary. So yeah, these court decisions just could not come fast enough.
And just a last question. I like to provide some solutions. So what are, not everyone's got the courage to go in and be brutally mishandled by police at a rally. Not everyone's brave enough to speak out online through ridicule. What are some things that the everyday average person that does want to chip in, what can they be doing? Is it signing petitions, reaching out to their MP? Definitely taking your mask off is one thing. Like, what are some things that you would say are really important to be doing?
Well, I think there's daily acts of small-scale civil disobedience, which I think really contributes to the greater good of humanity at this stage, given the inhumane times that we've been subjected to. So if there's one thing that people do, it's and one thing only: use your vote wisely. Okay, I know that here in Australia we haven't particularly been all that interested in politics for a really long time, but it's our disinterest in politics that have led to this horrible Labor-Liberal duopoly where as far as I'm concerned, we're essentially living in a one-party system. I don't consider there to be a great deal of difference between Labor and Liberal. One thing you do your research. Make sure you put Labor, Liberal, Nationals, and the Greens at the absolute bottom of the ballot paper. Do your research on the smaller parties and the independents. Number your votes. Use your preference system. There's a lot of people entering the political arena that do genuinely love this country, that do genuinely care about your freedom. If there's one thing you do, just please make your vote count.
Well said. And just for you, like, independent media is supported by the people. So if you want to give a shout out to your own website and where people can go to get merchandise or whatever they want, and those special reports as well, if you can just share that detail.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, so it's mcjreport.com. Feel free to sign up to my free newsletter. After every show, I send out a newsletter, and the great thing about that is that if I do get canned off social media, I can still send you an email. So yeah, that's it, mcjreport.com. And yeah.
You can get that. And from me, I want to just give you a big thank you. You certainly, if it wasn't for people like yourself and Monica and many of the other people, it's too many people to name, that are just being a bit of resistance, we would be completely and utterly trampled over without any doubt whatsoever, which is why they want to use that heavy-handedness. Otherwise, I say to everyone, there'd be 2 million people in the streets every single week. Enough people have just had an absolute gutful. And I want to just make a suggestion for you. And I think what you and Monica have done, and your story and how you've come together, and it's a true Hollywood love story, I would say. Being huge voices, it's a David and Goliath scenario, and Monica's been in jail, and you propose after that, and you continue the good fight. So from me, I want to thank you for jumping on the show.
No worries, Craig. Thank you very much for having me.
Cheers.
Thanks. All right, so I'd like to give a big thank you to Craig. Craig, thank you very much for having me on your show. Most definitely an honor. And for everybody at home, if there's one thing you do today, make sure that you check out Craig's Facebook page so you can stay up to date with his interviews and all the wonderful work that he is doing. Now, just a reminder, Craig doesn't have to be doing this. He's a self-made entrepreneur, but he's putting it on the line to take a stand for freedom and to speak out against the great deal of injustice that we are currently faced with. So It's facebook.com/Craig D. Schulze. That's right. That's SCHULZE. That's right. So, Craig, if you're watching, once again, thank you very much. And I spoke to Craig offline before, and we'll have him on the MCJ Report really soon to do a reversal of what that interview was. So I think that's going to be absolutely excellent. All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, that pretty much brings us to the end of the show. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in, and thank you to everybody who has been active in the chat, where we did this show live on Rumble and on YouTube. So I'm very grateful to everybody who has tuned in. We're going to have a lot to talk about next week. That's right. Tonight is, of course, the last MCJ report for the week. But I can tell you that next week we have Professor Ian Brighthope in store. We're going to talk about the real infection mortality rate of COVID-19, something the media doesn't want to really touch on. We're going to dig into Moderna. That's right, Moderna is getting suspended in multiple countries throughout the world, and there have been concerns cited in relation to young people taking that particular product. And what we see in Australia are schools setting up Moderna hubs within the school grounds. So we're also going to have a concerned parent on the show to share with us some interaction that he has received from his children's schools. And it's very concerning what's going on. And you know what? A lot of my supporters, they're pulling their kids out of school because they say they don't trust the government. They don't trust this notion of the whole mature minor allowing children to essentially make their own medical decisions, completely bypassing parental consent. So that will be a big topic for next week. And I'm sure that we're going to have other guests as well, like we always do. Sydney George is ramping up for some street interviews. That's right. So we're getting the MCJ microphone ready so George can hit the streets. And here's something else, right? We've got Sydney George, we've got Matt Dillon in Western Australia, but there's still a lot of states out there that we don't have MCJ contributors. So for anybody watching the broadcast right now, if you're from South Australia, Northern Territory, Queensland, Tasmania, ACT, get in touch. Get in touch if you would like to contribute to MCJ Report by giving updates from your state or territory. Send us an email, mcjreport@protonmail.com, and I extend that same invitation to our international audience. I think it'd be great to hear from some international people on MCJ Report. We cover international events regularly. We cover the corona madness and all the other madness unfolding in many countries around the world. So no matter where you're tuned in from, if you feel that's you, if you feel that you could do a good job delivering updates, if you keep up to date with the craziness that's going on in your neck of the woods, drop us a line, mcjreport@protonmail.com. And let's keep building, shall we, ladies and gentlemen? Let's keep on building. Anyway, I can see that there's still quite a few of you on Rumble and on YouTube. Thank you so much, Peter, Denise, DW Seeker from the United States, Ben. It's great to see all of you, Calix. It's really just such a pleasure. And that just about wraps it up for this evening. So once again, thank you very much. And MCJ Report will be back Monday night right here on Rumble and YouTube, 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. Take care.